I don't want to talk very much in this talk, really. I want Wilbert Smith to do the talking, so I think it's far better to hear people in their own words. So I'm just hopeful that these audio clips will play. I think I might have to fiddle around with it slightly, but hopefully we're ready to go.
Possibly one of the most interesting aspects of the study of flying saucers, beyond the realization that they are real and extraterrestrial, is their philosophy. What manner of creatures build and fly them? What do they look like? How do they think? Are their ideas and ideals similar to ours? Could we understand them? All these and many other questions plague the serious investigator.
So in this presentation, we will mainly examine Wilbert Smith's key role in the research and analysis of the flying saucer phenomenon, as it was called in his time. Smith seems to have given us significant things that he's told us, and he does not seem to be that well known. How many people have heard of Wilbert Smith? Probably about 10, 15 people, something like that, of maybe about 50 or 60, so not a high number. As a prominent member of the Canadian government, he had access to classified information. That's one of the key things. Smith held an unusual combination of views which seemed to be at odds with his scientific background and other work. Most scientists won't touch this subject. They say it's lunacy. And we're still faced with that today, even in the light of the sort of issues that David was raising earlier on. We will come across other figures who either worked with Smith or gave him information or were speaking out during the same time period, just in a few of these slides. These are some of Smith's contemporaries. A guy called Frank Edwards, who was kind of a sort of George Newry or Art Bell of his time. And he wrote a book called, I think it was Flying Saucers Have Landed. Flying Saucers Serious Business. I've got a picture of that later on. Major Donald Kehoe was a key figure. I've got a bit of a audio clip of him. And called Kenneth Arnold, who is said to have started off the modern UFO era with his sighting of these, what he called flying saucers in 1947, the same year as Roswell. And George Adamski, he was also in the sort of 50s. He's got a very interesting story. A lot of people think he just made it up, but again, if you study the Adamski story in detail, you can't really seem to explain it all that he just made it up. It's a very unusual story. And then, of course, Bessie and Barney Hill. These are all in the sort of 40s, 50s and 60s, which is when Smith was getting interested in this. So Smith, he was born in Lethbridge, Alberta, in Canada in 1910. He graduated from the University of British Columbia in 1933 with a BSc in electrical engineering. Smart guy. He obtained a master's in 1934, also at the University of British Columbia. And in 1934 and 35, he became chief engineer for a radio station, CJOR, in Vancouver. In the years following, at certain times, he acted as a consultant to the government, and in 1939, he joined the Federal Department of Transport. So he's going up the ranks. He was engaged in the engineering of Canada's wartime radio monitoring service. In 1947, he was in charge of establishing a network of ionospheric measurement stations, several of which were in isolated parts of northern Canada. He was interested in the Earth's ionosphere, and he was interested in things like radio wave propagation, which is, when you study the ionosphere, that's what you're interested in studying, how radio waves travel from one place to another. He eventually became the superintendent of radio regulations engineering with the Department of Transport in Canada. His research was in radio wave propagation, as I mentioned, where he came across such topics as aurorae or auroras, cosmic radiation, atmospheric radioactivity, geomagnetism, the Earth's magnetic field, that is, which tied in with theories on aspects of the saucer phenomenon. So that was his take on it as he developed his research. He continued to work for the Department of Transport until his death in 1962. He was only 52 when he died. And he died of cancer of the lower bowel. He didn't die of brain cancer. Some people say he got cancer of the brain. Not true. At the time of his death, he held 37 patents. And he took a number of advanced courses in physics as well after his master's. He was married to Merle, and they had 3 children, James, Dick and Norma Ray. So there's a little sort of family album. Pretty normal, regular guy with children. So, you know, you can see he's got a fairly sort of straight sort of background, very intelligent guy, very responsible in the government, a good background for studying this. His interest in flying saucers started when he became curious after reading an article in a magazine in the late 1940s. Though he started out as a strong skeptic, he pursued this interest in his own time strongly and systematically. Basically, for anyone who studies the evidence of this phenomenon, they will see that it is real, and he said that as well. Much like J.R. Hynek, who started off as a skeptic, and then he, having studied the evidence, realised that what he was seeing was a real phenomenon. He almost always referred to them as flying saucers, and very rarely as UFOs. In fact, a bit of history, that term was coined by Edward J. Ruppelt in 1952. And that, I think, in itself is a little bit of kind of a psychological trick. Oh, these things are unidentified. We can't tell you what they are. You'll never understand this. You get a lot of that with this sort of subject. You'll never understand it. You'll never know the truth. I don't agree with that, actually. And this is one of the things most people know him for, the top secret memo. And this was written by Smith in 1950, and it was discovered by a researcher called Nick Blaskus. And a copy of it was found in the University of Ottawa archives. There's actually two different copies of this. One is a draft, and one is one that was actually submitted, I think, in an envelope somewhere. But it was declassified by the Canadian government in 1979. And this is a scan of the document, so let's have a look a bit more at it. Now, there are 4 key points on this memo. Very, very interesting, written in 1950. The matter of flying saucers is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher even than the H-bomb, which of course was the research into which was going on at that time. Flying saucers exist. Their modus operandi, that means the way they work, is unknown, but a concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush, names certain people involved in the research of the phenomenon. So this gives other researchers something to follow up. The entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. That's what this official government top secret memo said. Didn't say, oh, it's all little green men, like the BBC are so fond of saying. Another interesting part, I was further informed that the United States authorities are investigating along quite a number of lines which might possibly be related to the sources, such as mental phenomena. And I gather that they are not doing too well, since they indicated that if Canada is doing anything at all in geomagnetics, they would welcome a discussion with suitably accredited Canadians. Mental phenomena. Now, the information about the classification of the UFO subject appears to have been given to Smith by a guy called Dr. Robert Sobacher. And he confirmed this in a 1983 telephone interview with a nuclear physicist and UFO investigator Stanton Friedman.
Hello?
Dr. Sobacher.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Stan Friedman up in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Let's see, early 50s. Now, the notes that I sent you from Wilbert Smith, do you remember? You do remember talking to him?
Yeah, vaguely.
The Canadian.
Yeah, vaguely.
Okay, his notes were 1950, and let me see the exact date. September 15th were his notes, 1950. He asked you a question that you didn't answer at that time, which was rather fascinating. Maybe you've just given me the answer in a sense. He quotes you as saying, yes, this is classified 2 points higher even than the H-bomb. In fact, it's the most highly classified subject in the U.S. government at the present time.
And that was the latest idea. Why?
Well,
it seems silly to me.
Well, his next comment, that was supposedly what you said, and then his next comment was, may I ask the reason for the classification? And you said, you may ask, but I can't tell you. Do you think that?
Because I didn't know.
Oh, okay, not because of this crash. There's no mention of a crash per se in this note. Do you think it could have happened after this?
I don't know. There may have been several of them. There was some talk that there
That was basically Sarbacher saying that he couldn't answer Wilbert Smith's question, not because it was classified and he was unable to reveal it, because he just didn't know the answer. And he was also mentioning that there were several reports of crashes. Robert Sarbacher worked for the US government, I believe. Now, it was not clear who gave Smith the information about mental phenomena. It wasn't Sarbacher. So this sort of idea that there was some kind of mental phenomena, I think he was meaning something like telepathy. And what we'll see later on in this is we get into the aspects of consciousness. Wilbert Smith left the draft memo in the files to give to future researchers. And the truth of what actually happened in the early days of government investigation into flying saucers. So he left this for other people to pick up because he knew what was going to happen. He knew that they were going to try and cover this up and keep it secret, and he didn't want that ultimately. Dying of cancer, Smith made arrangement with his wife to hide the files, including this top secret memo, so that they would survive his death. And he said they would be coming to recover them. And the Canadians, the Americans, and the Soviets approached Mrs. Smith requesting the files for research purposes. And Smith told all callers she no longer had the files. And after a number of break-ins that might have been linked to the search for the files were passed to Arthur Bray, an Ottawa researcher, who held them quietly for over 20 years. And this presentation has been made possible by that preservation and thanks to the work of a researcher called Grant Cameron. He's done a fantastic job with these files, and I should say I've got all these files on a disc. So if you want a copy of all these files to take home with you and have a poke around them yourself, you can have it on the disc. I've got about 20 copies or something. So, and if you want, I've run out, then I can give you a card and you can contact me and I can send you a copy. No problem. And the other thing that Smith is well known for is what's called Project Magnet. And this was a government-assisted research project. And as part of this memo, he was recommending research into the top secret memo, he was recommending research into the flying saucer phenomenon. It is therefore recommended that a project be set up within the framework of this section to study this problem, and that the work be carried on a part-time basis, always in the backroom type stuff, until such a time as sufficient tangible results can be seen to warrant more definitive action. The cost of the program in its initial stages are expected to be less than a few $100s. That's all he was asking for, and can be carried out by our radio standards lab appropriation. So though officially Smith's flying saucer interest was private, in reality he used his knowledge and government position to instigate a research project known as Project Magnet. And that's shown in the memo. And this was all to study aspects of the phenomenon with the equipment they were already using for other research, basically. Okay. Now the proposal was to set up a station at Shirley Bay, which was about 20 miles outside Ottawa. And this was the Department of Transport's communications monitoring facility, and the area was later to be used by the Department of Defence. So he actually set it up on government property. This was the unusual thing, government-sponsored research, which is very rare to find in this sort of field. And here's a couple of pictures of some of the equipment. This is a hut that's at Shirley's Bay now. I think they've got some communications monitoring equipment in here. And this is some of the equipment that we'll be using for the project. The project ran for about 3 or 4 years with the aim of gathering information about magnetic phenomena. It was meant to be classified in case the results yielded a new insight into magnetic phenomena which might be exploited. It was not actually called a saucer detection station, and its existence was only reluctantly acknowledged during Smith's lifetime. So they tried to keep this quiet. You know, the government didn't want people to know they were taking flying saucers seriously, and they were trying to make some measurements. That was a no-no. Spending public money on a joke. On 8th of August 1954, at 3:01 p.m, after 8 months of watching flat lines on graph paper, in other words, what that means is they had these detectors linked to chart recorders, and these remained flat, didn't see anything, so once I and all of these charts suddenly went crazy and had a gravimeter measuring the local gravitational field, but at that time, the area was completely fogged in. so they couldn't see what flew overhead. So in other words, this was an incident where something flew over the detection station, set off all the instruments, but it was a foggy day, so they couldn't see a thing. And this is what happens time and again. The observatory and Project Magnet were both shut down 2 days later. 2 days. How strange is that? Just a coincidence, of course. And after Smith's death in 1962, the strength of the denials about the project seemed to increase, which we'll come to in a minute. I've got another audio clip.
I might point out that the Project Magnet that I was associated with, and which received a great deal of publicity, was not an official government project. It was a project that I talked the deputy minister into letting me carry out, making use of the extensive field organization of the Department of Transport. No funds were spent on it, and we merely had access to the very large field organization and opened a number of files. Unfortunately, the gentleman of the press climbed on this and made a big deal out of it. As a matter of fact, some of the headlines concerning Project Magnet were set in larger type than the declaration of war. However, we carried the project through officially for about 4 years, and the last year of the 4, we had a little shed set up in which we had a number of instruments, the idea being to try and coordinate sightings with scientific measurements. We had equipment for detecting any radio noise that might emanate from these objects, any gravitational disturbances which might result, any radioactivity which might be connected with it, and any magnetic disturbances. These 4 instruments were of a recording type and produced graphical lines on a recording tape using a 4-pin recorder. This ran 24 hours a day with alarm circuits attached so that in case any of the pins moved beyond a prescribed limit, the horns would blow and the bells would ring, and the boys in the nearby ionosphere station were supposed to come running to see if they could see anything.
Okay, so Project Magnet, I won't read all this, I'll probably skip over a bit of this, but basically it wasn't declassified. It was classified in 1953 and it wasn't declassified until 1979. So even though there wasn't really that great deal to it, they wouldn't admit their involvement in it until 1979. And Smith made some conclusions. I won't read all that text out, so we might probably skip on to a bit more, some more audio clips and things. But basically, Smith wrote to a man who was attempting to get a copy of Project Magnet report. He wrote the report at the end of this project, and he said, you will recall last March that I didn't think you had the proverbial snowball's chance of prying it loose. No minister in his right mind is going to release any report which in any way might prove embarrassing or give rise to questions which he or his colleagues might find difficult to answer. So, because the government officials can't answer these questions that we're exploring today, they're never going to release this information in any serious way. We're just not equipped to deal with it. We're on a different level. They basically increase the level of denial over time. Now in the 1950s they said this entire program, Project Magnet, is being carried on with official approval and authority to make use of existing facilities, which is what Smith said. He was just using the existing network in his spare time and the spare capacity they had to do a bit of research on the source of phenomenon. Months after Smith died, late in 1962, Mr. Dupuy, Minister of the Department of Transport, made his final positive statement in the House of Commons. Between December 1950 and August 1954, a small programme of investigation in the field of geomagnetics was carried out by the then Communications Division of the Department of Transport, with a view to obtaining, if possible, some physical information or facts which might help to explain the phenomenon, which was generally referred to as unidentified flying objects. Mr. W.B. Smith was the engineer in charge of this programme, so they acknowledged it. But later on, they sort of distanced themselves from it and then ended up denying it. Smith actually covers most of the panoply of the UFO phenomenon, and now we're going to look at the Contactee issue. Smith came into contact with Frances Swan in 1954. She claimed to be in touch with extraterrestrials who were sending her messages and information. She was one of a number of ET contactees that Smith corresponded with, and you'll hear a bit more about this from Smith shortly. This was due to Swan coming into contact with the US government regarding 2 mysterious satellites. This is a story that not many people know about, which orbited the Earth in 1953. Anyone know when Sputnik went up? 57. Yeah, 57. So how come we had satellites orbiting the Earth in 53? In 1954, one reportedly came in and hovered over the Pentagon at 90,000 feet. Swan claimed to be in contact with one of the occupants of the ships named Affer, who was commander of M4, and Ponar, who was commander of L11, possibly describing them as 190 miles across. Vice Admiral Knowles, who knew Smith, lived close to Swan, and he asked her technical questions which she was able to answer. This convinced Knowles that she had genuine knowledge of these satellites. Swan was later investigated by the FBI. This is the only picture we've got of her. Swan stated that on many occasions she was in contact with Affer, and I hear from Grant Cameron that Affer became like a member of Smith's family, and they're always talking about what Affer said. You go on a car journey and they say, oh, Affer said this, Affer said that. Very interesting. These contacts went on for several years. She tried to arrange a meeting between Affer, Smith, government officials at an agreed location. And yes, the documents about this were originally classified. Frances Swan lived quite close, coincidentally, about a mile away, I understand, to Betty and Barney Hill, the 1961 abductees. How strange is that? And we've got a sheet. There's pages of this on the disc of this kind of automatic writing that Swan did. I'm not sure whether Swan typed this up or somebody else. But some of these are just very brief messages, like it says here. We are all right. Do not worry. Contact is good. Lots of love to you for your attention. And seem very, very friendly, these people, when you read some of these transcripts. But like a lot of the contact information, some of it seemed accurate, while some of it seemed very wild and inaccurate, which is what you find with this information. So the 53 satellites.
Our guest tonight is Major Donald E. Kehoe, U.S. Marine Corps retired, a veteran of 35 years of civilian and military flying experience. Major Kehoe was aide to Colonel Charles Lindbergh on Whitney's tour of the country after the historic transatlantic flight. A well-known aviation writer, in 1950, Major Kehoe brought out his bestseller, Flying Saucers Are Real, which stirred up a real tempest. And in 1953, another bestseller, Flying Saucers from Outer Space, books based on material from Air Force and Canadian official sources. Major Kehoe, what are the most recent developments in this field of unidentified flying objects?
There are 3 very important developments which have been kept from the public. In the first place, there's at least 1 and possibly 2 artificial satellites circling the Earth at the present time. An intensive effort is being made by government pilots at White Sands, New Mexico, to locate and chart the courses of these satellites in an effort to determine what they are and where they came from. Secondly, within the last 2 weeks, Canadian government pilots have notified all official sky watchers to be especially alert and to report immediately any unidentified aerial objects. The third development, which has been kept secret, is this. In the closing week of March, Air Force Secretary Talbot made 2 trips to Palm Springs, California in an Air Force plane. On one of those trips, shortly after the plane had passed Fresno, California, the crew of Secretary Talbot's plane discovered that it was being followed by a large, silvery disc-shaped object, which was flying about 1,000 feet below the Secretary's plane and about 1,000 feet distant. The unidentified object was seen by Secretary Talbot, the crew of his plane, and Secretary Talbot's aides who accompanied him on the trip. After watching the disc for several minutes, Secretary Talbot ordered his plane to swing around and approach it. The object immediately accelerated and disappeared at high speed. This was a daylight sighting of long duration by credible personnel and under very favorable conditions. In view of the tremendous amount of evidence that is being concealed by airport secrecy. It is high time the American people demanded to know the facts.
Thank you very much. Major Donald E. Kehoe, U.S. Marine Corps, retired.
So that was Major Donald Kehoe. The recording wasn't that clear, but at least it gives you a confirmation that he knew about the satellites. You can see it was reported in the papers. This is not just stuff that somebody made up. And they went to observe these things in Mexico, I think he said there. Now, one of the things we're going to come on to in a minute is that Smith started to get information from these beings, how to build things, and he built them. One of which was an anti-gravity experiment. One of the contactees, who was said to be in contact with Afa and Tyler, was a blind telex operator in Ottawa. In 1959, during one of Smith's gravity control experiments in his lab, they were rotating a copper plate at 15,000 to 18,000 revs per minute. So Smith started performing experiments. I've got a bit more on this. This is slightly out of sequence because I wanted to join it with the contact information. The phone rang and the telex operator reported he had a message from AFA saying the experiment needed shielding, in other words, this rotating disc. They built a brick wall around the experiment and then they set the experiment going, and the experiment did indeed blow up on the next run. So they were protected. So how did that happen? How did that blind telex operator send that message to Smith at the appropriate time? Smith also stated that he had contact through an anonymous intermediary with another man from outside called Tyler, who described himself as a garbage collector. Here, well, in this clip, he tells the story. Basically, I'm probably going to just go on to the next remark in a short time, but he described this bizarre situation where Tyler and AFA were responsible for cleaning up after nuclear tests. And the craft would fly to where the nuclear test had been, and they would suck in the material, and then they would eject the material at a safe location. Having processed it, they would process this material in their craft and then eject it. And this is what he says in the audio clip. But now we'll move on to his developing of technology, proving the science. He looked at free energy. This is one of the current themes, as David brought up with Gary McKinnon, for example. It's actually the key central theme, I think, to this whole issue. As part of Project Magnet, Smith conducted some experiments in which he showed it was possible to extract energy from the Earth's magnetic field alone. He thought this was what the saucers used for both propulsion and as an energy source. He described this device as a magnetic sink, which energy would flow into, and this is the circuit diagram. Yeah, this is on the desk as well. I had somebody at a lecture and they said, "Oh, I understand that circuit." So it's a valid circuit. It was only a small amount of energy, but he worked out a way of extracting energy from the Earth's magnetic field, which is not something that is done with regular technology that we have. Smith stated he had been given instructions from the Boys Topside about how to build experimental hardware. I'll basically just play the audio clip.
As far as I know, our group in Ottawa are the only group that has actually taken the information which was given to us by the Boys Topside and translated it into hardware that works. Much information has been given to us through various channels, but people just talk about it. They don't do anything about it. And I think that is deplorable. I think when they give us information, the least we can do is to show our good faith by trying at least to convert that information into hardware. We have built 2 items of hardware on their instructions that I'm rather proud of.
And the first one is this.
They gave us the design of the instrument, which was fundamentally this. They said to select 2 materials, one stronger than the other. And they said to arrange so that these 2 materials pulled against each other in such a manner that the weaker material was very near its breaking point and the strong material was a long way from its breaking point. On that basis, we devised instruments, and we built quite a number of them in the shop and sent them around to various people that we knew did quite a bit of traveling. And we asked them if they would investigate the regions through which aircraft must have passed just prior to breaking up in midair. And we have, unfortunately, a large record of our airplanes having done just this. One of these unexplained crashes occurred at a place called Isuta, which is about 20 miles south and west of Quebec City. And
I'm just going to cut that short because basically he built this binding meter which was to measure the binding forces in any given region. This is something we don't have in our physics or science. That he says that basically in some places around the world things have a greater tendency to fall apart, and that's what's responsible for some of these mysterious plane crashes, that they've been through an area of low binding and the components would suddenly just anomalously weaken and the thing would just fall apart. And he tested that with this meter. The second thing he tested was this coil.
One of those pieces of hardware is a coil. It has a ferrite core and a trick winding on it. To look at it, it looks like a rather oddly wound inductor. When measured on a radio frequency bridge, however, it shows some very peculiar properties. There are certain frequencies at which it is impossible to balance the RF bridge, and that is a direct contradiction to what any electrical engineer will tell you should happen with a coil of wire wound on a ferrite core. Now, if we take this coil and we excite it with radio frequency energy at or near these critical frequencies, we find that energy goes into the coil and nothing comes out. It just disappears. As a matter of fact, we had one coil about 1 inch in diameter and 8 inches long, and we poured a kilowatt into that coil for 2 hours from a kilowatt communications type transmitter. The coil was in a 2-inch brass tube with a plate welded on one end and a transmission line fitting on the other. We could find no radiation around the outside of that tube at all. In other words, the energy went in and none came out. The information which we got from the Boys Topside was that we were actually making tensor energy, which is a 6-dimensional radio wave. And it is the type of energy that they use extensively for radio communication, transmission of power, and for pushing and pulling. In fact, they use it for just about everything that we could think of.
So he basically said that in building that coil and putting electricity into it, he produced a different type of energy called tensor energy, which was, he was told by the Boys Topside that this was coming out of it, although they couldn't detect it. And Smith postulated that in simple terms, that the force of gravity was actually the result of interacting magnetic fields and the objects themselves generated. He suggested that a motional magnetic field might be used to influence gravity, and he and his team designed experiments to test this. Variations on this type of experiment have been reproduced many times in the 20th and 21st century now. It seems very unlikely that Smith would lie about his experimental results or misinterpret them, because he was very competent in doing that sort of work. He basically measured the weight of an object, and by spinning it at high speed or spinning something underneath it, he was able to decrease the weight by 1%. He said it wasn't very much, but he knew it was a real effect, having repeated the experiment many times. Smith corresponded with several people, stating he had handled a number of pieces of saucer hardware from crashes or military encounters, and had been involved in their analysis. Art Bridge, one of Smith's associates, stated that they were also involved in analysis of a lot of hardware. And I'll play this audio clip which will explain this bit.
Yeah, so it came from the States. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. On more than one occasion, there were these pieces that were sent to them?
On several occasions, they did different sizes, and there was no regularity to it at all. You'd send them away for analysis and try to cut pieces off of it, and we could as well.
Yeah.
There's some of those pieces you're saying, some came in the mail, some came by military vehicle. Yes.
would you have been then?
Oh, well, looking at 17 in that age group.
Did you get an opportunity to handle any of them? And how would you know what was an unusual looking piece of metal at the age of...
I got to handle a few of them. One was talked about the size of a brick, semicircular in shape, very smooth metal except where the jagged edges were disconnected from whatever it belonged to. It was quite heavy in terms of its size. He had analysis done that when I remember seeing that particular analysis sheet come back, and there were a few things in there that they're not found on this planet that were unidentifiable.
Oh, really?
Other than that, they were high tensile steel and whatever else goes into it.
So, presumably that paperwork was secret. He wouldn't have kept any copies of the analysis.
No, I don't know where it was gone.
So that was Jim Smith confirming he handled metal samples that had been sent to Wilbert Smith. You know, Jim Smith was in the house at the time. He picked these things up. He handled them. Smith was recognised as an expert, and so he was sent material to analyse. I'll just skip over this because we're going to get short of time otherwise. The other thing that Smith apparently went to see was alien bodies, and this is Jim Smith talking about that.
Now, Jim, you mentioned that he was shown bodies at one point, or something? Yeah, on one of the times, he was in the States a lot, partly due to his work as a superintendent of radio regulation, so he had to deal with frequency allegation channels, radio, and that sort of business. So he was frequently on committees in the States where they were working out joint frequency allegations, for example, and on several occasions he was invited off to be shown things along this line. So that was pretty well under the Official Secrets Act, he told us. However, when just before he passed away in 62, he felt the act couldn't get him any more than that, so I did ask him, and he said yes, he saw the bodies. And he had several connections with high-ranking military folks, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And one of them was Rear Admiral Knowles, I believe. Yeah, we were at Knowles' home on many occasions. Yeah. And he was with the Office of Naval Intelligence? Yeah. Right, so there was opportunity there for this type of thing to be legitimate. He wasn't just, he was told these things were there, and he saw them. Yeah.
It would have been interesting to be a fly on the wall at those social gatherings, wouldn't it?
Unbelievable, yeah. Did he describe them at all? Do you recall any? Not that I can recall, except that the descriptions that have sort of been out and about were fairly accurate.
The descriptions that were out and about were fairly accurate.
Do we have descriptions of graves at that time?
I think there were descriptions of smallish types. I don't know about necessarily the coloring, but no, I don't remember a lot of those details. I just read them. It satisfied my curiosity that he had seen them and that they were real.
So that was Wilbert Smith's son confirming that his father did see the alien bodies. Why would Wilbert Smith lie to his son about such a thing? Or something like this. Smith got to a point where once he'd been through all the evidence and he'd had all this, he built the technology, he just, he couldn't really debate with anyone who wanted to debate whether it was real or not. He said, it's just like ploughing and reploughing the same field. That was the point he got to. But he wanted to find out more about the meaning of the phenomenon. And in the last few years of his life, Smith turned his attention to the task of trying to rewrite the whole idea of scientific thinking from the ground up, based on what he had learned from his experience and his experiments and from the Boys Topside. And the start of this is on the internet, it's on Rex Research. Smith states, assembled by W.B. Smith from data obtained from beings more advanced than we are. So just briefly, I've got to skip through this a bit faster than I normally do, which is why I've sort of cut a few corners. I have got a video to play, which I think is going to run about 3 minutes over, but we're going to go for it, I think, so it's very important. Smith seems to have been involved in almost all the fields of ufology. Sightings, investigation, alien contact, viewing of alien bodies, free energy technology, anti-gravity technology, handled hardware, sorts of pieces, and he was also knew how the cover-up worked because of what was at stake. He also had a realisation that metaphysics is important in understanding the phenomena. And I think the best way for you to understand about that is to hear and speak about it.
1958. W.B. Smith speaking. I have been actively engaged in the investigation of the group of phenomena known as flying saucers for over 7 years. During this period, I have read most of the available literature on the subject, interviewed a great many people who have seen unusual things in the sky, examined many pictures and physical objects, made observations with scientific instruments, and carried on a series of communications with intelligences claiming to be extraterrestrial. I started the investigation out of curiosity and as an extreme skeptic, fully expecting to find the phenomena to be due to man-made or natural causes. I am 48 years old, hold a master's degree in electrical engineering, occupy a responsible position in the Canadian government, hold a half-dozen patents, author of several technical papers, and in general enjoy a background in technical work and science, indicating at least an average competence to study and report on phenomena of scientific nature. I have tried so far as possible to use conventional and standard methods and equipment, and to investigate all possible angles before drawing any conclusions. In other words, I have followed the same general procedures which I would have followed if I had undertaken to study some more prosaic subject, such as radio wave propagation. The first phase of the work consisted of reading all available literature, collecting as much observational data as possible, and in general getting a fair perspective of the problem. The second phase involved theoretical and laboratory work to find openings in our technology and to establish relevant reference points. And the third phase involved following up the many and varied leads which developed from the first two phases. I do not intend to dwell on the first phase of this work, as my experience was quite parallel with that of other investigators who have provided extensive published reports of their findings. Nor will I dwell on the many dead ends which were explored, which looked promising at first, but faded out under careful investigation. Nor will I be able to be as specific as I would like to be with respect to material given to me in confidence or which came to me through classified channels. Furthermore, it is not my intention to try and convert anyone to my way of thinking, but merely to state what I believe and why I believe it. Let us look at a few facts. First, hundreds of normal, honest people have seen lights in the sky which behaved like no light normally seen in the sky ought to behave. Second, hundreds of normal, honest people have seen what appear to be solid, real objects in the sky which behave like no object normally seen in the sky ought to behave. Third, hundreds of people have seen objects in the Earth's atmosphere at sufficiently close range to see enough detail to enable them to say definitely what the object was not, even though they could not identify what it was. Fourth, descriptions of these objects from observers where circumstances virtually preclude collusion check quite well among themselves and against data received from other sources. It is not reasonable to assume that hundreds of ordinary, normal people, whose word we would readily accept under more mundane circumstances, for instances as witnesses to an automobile accident, should suddenly become liars, fools, neurotics, and otherwise quite incompetent observers. I have interviewed many of these people myself, and I am convinced that they are sane, sober, honest folk who are reporting as best they can something which they really did witness. I will concede that maybe some of these people did not do as good a job of observing as someone who is better trained might have done, but within their limits, I believe they did honestly report what they saw. Let us look at a few more facts. First, there have been several close brushes with these objects, and in one case at least, the aircraft pilot lost his life as a consequence. Captain Mantell was reported killed as a result of chasing a flying saucer on January 7, 1947. The incident is described in detail in the report on unidentified flying objects by Edward J. Ruppelt, pages 51 to 60. Second, people who have been near these objects have described physical sensations which are unusual to say the least, but which are quite consistent with what is known of the technology under which they operate. As nearly as we are able to recreate the accident, Mantell was pursuing an unidentified flying object and was able to get quite near. In fact, apparently well into its operating field. His aircraft just fell apart and was scattered over quite an area. Mantell's body, when recovered, was not displayed even to his next of kin. Several people who have found themselves close to these objects have remarked on the insufferable heat which seemed to pervade the general region. Also, there seemed to be a gravitational necessity to lean away from the object to maintain balance. While these facts may seem to be rather incredible, nevertheless, there exists quite a good record in support of each occurrence. Furthermore, the technology of which we have been able to get a glimpse, namely that of manipulation of the three basic fields, electric, magnetic, and tempic, indicates quite a straightforward answer and explanation of these phenomena. In Mantell's case, the altered field configuration in the vicinity of the craft reduced the binding forces within the structure of the aircraft to a value below that of the load which the parts were expected to carry, so it just came apart. Also, there was probably a substantial reduction in tempic field intensity, which would give, in effect, a rise in temperature to the aircraft and contents. I understand that Mantell's body gave every indication of having been subjected to considerable heat. This rise in temperature has been reported as being quite noticeable at distances of several hundred feet from one of these craft when it is making use of certain combinations of fields. Also, since gravity involves a tempic field function, it follows that an alteration in this field could well be reflected in the direction and magnitude of the nearby gravity field. There have been quite a number of alleged communications with intelligences claiming to be extraterrestrial. I have followed up each such instance to the best of my ability in an effort to A, establish or disprove the validity of the alleged communication, and B, to obtain any information which might be available if the contact should be authentic. As might be expected, many of these alleged contacts provided little or nothing of value, but a few did pay off. Some of the contacts have been the subject of published material, but by far the majority are confidential, and there are a surprising number of these contacts. The procedure in checking contacts was to ask a number of innocuous but significant questions, and compare the answers with the answers to the same questions as obtained through other contacts. Questions were of the type, do people live on the planet Mars? If so, what is the shape of their houses? Do people on Mars use money? If so, what does it look like? Altogether, some 100 or more questions were involved. The results were spectacular, to say the least. Among the contacts that might be classed as authentic, there was almost complete agreement. Among the other alleged contacts, there was extremely poor agreement or none at all. Of course, where agreement was general, but one or two points didn't fit, an effort was made to find out why the discrepancy. In each case, it was found that someone had injected a terrestrial idea or comment instead of transmitting faithfully that which was received. Now, having located what seemed to be channels of communication between ourselves and these extraterrestrial intelligences, the next and obvious step was to try and get as much information as possible. As may be expected, this effort was at first directed toward science and technology. But it soon became apparent that there was a very real and quite large gap between this alien science and the science in which I had been trained. Certain crucial experiments were suggested and carried out, and in each case the results confirmed the validity of the alien science. Beyond this, the alien science was just incomprehensible. There followed a period of soul-searching, during which many doubts were raised. While we were able to establish that these people from outside all told the same story, was that story the truth? True, there existed some pretty good evidence to support their statements, but maybe there was some other more conventional explanation. If the whole thing were a delusion, then quite a large number of people were suffering from precisely the same delusion. And furthermore, delusions are not externalized. At least I had never heard of such a case. If, on the other hand, it were a hoax, it was by far the most gigantic hoax the world had ever known. And to what end, and by whom was it perpetrated? The inevitable conclusion was that it was all real enough, but that the alien science was definitely alien, and possibly even forever beyond our comprehension. So another approach was tried, the philosophical. And here the answer was found in all its grandeur. I will not go into detail on the many revisions in ideas and basic thinking, beyond stating that the people from outside displayed great patience and understanding in overcoming the prejudices and misinformation I had spent many years in accumulating. I began for the first time in my life to realize the basic oneness of the universe and all that is in it. Science, philosophy, religion, substance, and energy are all facets of the same jewel, and before any one facet can be appreciated, the form of the jewel itself must be perceived. One of the most important things I had to realize was that we are not alone. The human race in the form of man extends throughout the universe and is incredibly ancient. Also, its appearance in physical form is but one of its many manifestations along the path of progress. Our civilization here on Earth now is only one of many that have come and gone. This planet has been colonized many times by people from elsewhere, and our present human race are blood brothers of these people. Is it any wonder that they are interested in us? To orthodox thinkers this may seem strange, but not nearly so strange as our orthodox ideas on evolution. The question might be asked, if these people are our brothers and are interested in our welfare, why do they remain so aloof? The answer is available. There is a basic law of the universe which grants each and every individual independence and freedom of choice, so that he may experience and learn from his experiences. No one has the right to interfere in the affairs of others. In fact, our 10 Commandments are directives against interference. If we disregard this law, we must suffer the consequences. And a little thought will show that our present world state is directly attributable to violation of this principle. When we enter this life, we do so to participate in certain events, the sequence of which was established before our birth, and which, if altered substantially, would deprive us of experiences necessary to our development. We have built-in protection against altering substantially these sequences in that we do not consciously know of them. But these people from outside have a much greater knowledge than we have, and have means of perceiving the sequences which must not be changed. Therefore, while they have every desire in the world to help, and stand by, ready, able, and willing to do so, they are not permitted by cosmic law to interfere. The dividing line between help and interference is very delicate indeed, and sometimes hard to perceive. But it is a demonstration of individual and collective progress how well we can be guided by it. I am told that one of our difficulties is that we do not recognize a sufficient number of dimensions and make use of them in our science. Furthermore, we do not recognize the true nature of dimensions or of their place in our universe. I am told that so far as we are concerned, there are 12 dimensions of deity, and these provide the entire structure of our universe. Our conventional concepts of dimensions are most inadequate and restrictive, and so long as we persist in them, we can never transcend the world of mechanical processes which we have built. In science, we have an established procedure always to tie a new discovery or observation to that which we already know, even though to do so requires extensive patchwork and perturbation factors to be applied to our existing knowledge to make the new knowledge fit. We invariably assume that the new knowledge must somehow be closely related to the old, and we are most zealous in tying the two together. As a consequence, we bend and warp our units of knowledge so that we can fasten them together, whether or not they belong together, until we have fabricated quite a structure which is almost completely closed on itself. Consequently, when we do find knowledge that should but just won't fit our structure, we have no alternative but to reject it. I am informed that science really is much more simple than we imagine, and all the component parts fit together perfectly without any corrections. Possibly we should start over again and reassemble our knowledge in a different pattern, and this time fit the jigsaw puzzle together properly without trimming the pieces. I feel sure that if we were to do this and accept the philosophy upon which this new approach must of necessity be based, we can enjoy the technology and the way of life which is demonstrated to us by the presence of the spacecraft and of our brothers from elsewhere. Thank you.
If anyone wants to tell me what that is, I'm open to explanations. Smith said, "I make no attempt to prove anything, and have no intention of doing so. It is up to each and every one of us to search out the truth and decide for themselves just what is truth. Truth needs no justification. It stands alone." And I'd just like to thank Grant Cameron for his work in compiling the information, most of which was used to generate this presentation. Thanks very much.